Today is fine day in California.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Friday Night Frenzy, where everything is canon and the Emperor is always right. Yeah, so we'll be doing a very Warhammer flavored stream today. But first, let's introduce our co-host, shall we? First, we have Sub Extraordinary Chiron.
My face when I see.
Yes, he's having some technical difficulties, so he'll be popping in and out throughout the stream. But for a more stable connection, we have special guest extraordinaire War Master.
Hey everybody, it's great to be here.
So, could you introduce yourself for those who aren't familiar with your walking ways?
I go by War Master on Twitter. My ad is Mr. Antihero1. And I've been in 40k on and off for the last, like I said, 24 years earlier. Before we were on the screen here. Started off with about 2000, it was like 2001, 2002-ish. I went to a summer camp and was one of those outcasts, except they were already playing 40k at the time. I had no idea what it was, of course, but I saw they had miniatures and they looked cool, and so I was like, oh, what is that? It's like, oh, this is Warhammer. And I was like, oh, what do you guys play? And they're like, oh, we're I think they were playing Ultramarines, like stereotypical Ultramarines. And I said, oh, who do they fight against? Because again, knowing nothing about the universe, like, oh, it's the Chaos Space Marines. I was like, I want to play those guys because I wanted to be the contrarian at the time. And so a couple months later, didn't have the money to buy miniatures at the time, but I ended up buying I want to say it was like the 4th or 5th edition Chaos Space Marine Codex. And just read that cover to cover a million times. And then about a decade or so later, I rediscovered it in ways, and have just been deep into it ever since. I started off like I would pick random articles out of the different wikis that are out there. So there's the Lexicanum and there's the fandom wiki that's out there. And as with any wiki, you have to be kind of selective, or take it with a grain of salt anyway, because
Bias.
Right. Or people just putting in edits, or just, not citing where things are coming from. And I was trying to, but otherwise, that's kind of where I started off until I...
No, Winston, females cannot be space... We'll get to that.
Let's see.
Sorry, I got you off your thing. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. I was trying to see where the chat was. Oh, there it is. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I started reading the wikis like really hardcore. I would pick random articles. Just like, okay, I'll select Eldar and then go to, Craft World and then pick a random Craft World and read about that and so on. And then eventually I was able to, start saving some cash. I started buying audiobooks. Humble Bundle, by the way, is wonderful if you haven't heard them.
Yes, they are. I use that to get royalty-free music a lot.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah, I got like a huge Black Library ebook bundle from them. And
nice.
Read through all that in a couple of weeks, and yeah, it's just been kind of that way ever since. I've just sucked up the lore, and here I am.
Like a vacuum.
Yes. It became my tism hyperfixation.
Yeah, so I guess the first question to start with would probably be, what is the appeal of Warhammer? Like, what is it that gets a lot of people interested? I know this is probably a multifaceted question. So if you can't answer in general, just answer, what is the appeal for you?
For me specifically, it's... I've mentioned this before a few times on Twitter in the past, but the big thing for me is that it's this very dark, oppressive universe. But what comes like from the darkness, the light shines all the brighter is kind of the way I always think about it.
Okay.
And so you're putting humanity up against like the most dire of odds, like, galaxy species ending kind of stuff, and they're horrors beyond imagining. And then you just have these heroic moments in there. And I don't know, that I really like that about the setting, is that you like I said, the light shines brighter in this darkness, and kind of the indomitability of the human spirit, um,
Hmm.
and all that good stuff. But
Okay.
and plus, I'm a giant sci-fi nerd, so
Yes, that last part is probably pretty important as well. I'd imagine. Um, so I understand like there's a lot of factions. You kind of like reference that. Currently, what is your preferred faction?
so if I'm forced to pick one, like this is my top faction, it's the Imperial Guard, or if I'm gonna be specifically like really pretentious, the Astra Militarum. Um, just because, like I was saying before, it's like humanity standing up against these dark times, and so when you basically put a bunch of like regular dudes up against 15-foot tall giant space insects that want to eat them, and they stand up against that, and I find that very kind of
Well, the only
inspiring in a
good
way.
bug is a dead bug, so.
Just facts. uh and Tevye, that's actually, it's funny, Space Marines they are up there for me because they're the super soldiers, and everybody not everybody, but a lot of people like to say how impractical the power armor is because they have those giant pauldrons, and I love it. I'm not even gonna lie. I
I
love
mean,
the aesthetic.
I'm a Warcraft fan, so I'm used to giant pauldrons. It means it looks cool. I don't care.
Right, like it's you have these big slabs of metal on your shoulders, and you can do so, like it's a huge canvas you can put a lot on, so it's great.
Yeah, and I think like we're kind of touching upon like a lot of other universes have borrowed from 40K. Like we talked about StarCraft. I think Warcraft itself borrowed from the Warhammer Fantasy. That's not really what we're talking about, but it kind of bears mention. Um, some would say Starship Troopers, but the book Starship Troopers came out like 20 to 30 years before this came out, if anything. Like, so what do you think is the relationship between Starship Troopers and Warhammer?
So probably
I've read the book, by the way. I've read the book, so I'm familiar with it.
Oh yeah. I actually I need to finish it. I've gone through most of it. Because it's that whole argument popped up recently on Twitter, and so
If anything,
okay.
I think Starship Troopers is more of an inspiration for Halo than it is Warhammer.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was gonna say. Is there's a little bit of influence, I think you can tell just from the concept of like the Space Marines a little bit. Like you have these highly trained, highly technologically advanced, troopers that come from outer space. Especially they have kind of like drop pods in Starship Troopers, don't they? A little bit, if I remember.
Yeah, Halo has that as well. Because I didn't mean to make this a Starship Troopers thing, but
No, you're fine.
Thing is, when people most people will think of Starship Troopers, think of the movie, which I love the movie. The movie's great.
Yeah.
But the movie, like the book, has a heavy emphasis on the power armor. Like they put a lot of emphasis on the power armor, and the movie just completely omits the power armor aspect of it, which is like carving out like 25% of the book right there.
Right. Yeah, and I remember catching that when I started reading that. I was like, oh, they got power armor. So that was the other thing I was going to mention too. Is there's the power armor influence, but the thing that stands out for me is the drop pods, and I know Halo does have them for the ODSTs. But just whenever somebody says drop pod, the first thing I always think of is the Space Marine drop pod.
I mean, I think it's pretty clear Warhammer took some inspiration from 40K. I mean, they're facing like giant bugs.
Oh
like,
yeah,
I think the bugs are very I think it's the Tyranids.
Yes,
I think the Tyranids are very clearly inspired by the Starship Troopers bugs.
Oh, for sure, and it's actually, funnily enough, there's some inspiration from the Dune books as well. What with the God Emperor kind of thing, and
here's what I wonder:
that sort of stuff.
Do you think the bugs had any inspiration? Like, I think Ender's Game even came out before Warhammer. So, like, do you think they took any inspiration from the Ender's Game bugs?
40K was released in 1984.
I think Ender's Game was released in the 70s, I believe.
Really? Oh wow, I've read that book a
Let me
ton.
let me look. Oh yeah, it's like one of my favorite books. But let me look at the publishing date. 1980. Ender's Game. I was so. It looks like I'm so wrong. 1985. So okay. So yeah, it came out after Warhammer. Then it was probably in development long before it, but still, at least a contemporary. At least a contemporary.
Oh, for sure.
But still, there's some cross pollination there at least. Also, we have our lovely co-host, Nyx, popping in to say hi. She's fighting through the sickness. Thank you. We adore you.
Hi, Nyx.
And then we got the OC Doctor says, I also love Hammer because of the lore. We technically did see Power Armor animated movies, which is super interesting. Never really got into the Starship Troopers sequels. Apparently developing a remake, so that could be they'll probably find some way to f that up.
Yeah, unfortunately. I've heard surprisingly good things about the animated Starship Troopers. Haven't watched them, but I've heard good things. But yeah, there's something else I was gonna say. It's gone, so it's fine.
It'll come back to you. So, like, what are some other like notable races, factions you want to touch on? Like orcs, Tau. Like I said, I have a passing knowledge of a lot of the stuff.
Well, so humanity obviously has a lot of the different factions, even though they kind of fall under the same umbrella. So you have the Imperial Guard, which I mentioned before, Space Marines. This is just a battle, or again, to be pretentious, the Adeptus Sororitas. Yeah, nuns with guns. And then within that, you could say there's the Inquisition, the Imperial Navy, that sort of thing. But the other big one within the Imperium is the Adeptus Mechanicus, or the Priests of Mars, the Tech Priests. And then really from there, I would say you mentioned one already, which is the Tyranids. They're they're like the existential, super crazy, like life devouring bugs. Then you have the Tau, which are like a conglomeration of races headed up by a race that is called Tau. And it's kind of like they are more, what is that phrase from Animal Farm? More equal than others.
All Tau are equal, but some Tau are more equal than others.
There you go. Yeah, so that's kind of the Taus.
So they're space Japanese.
Yeah, kinda. People like to call them space communists a lot, and then it's not exactly, because their motto is for the greater good, or the greater good's kind of like their driving societal thing. Yeah, so they form this conglomeration, and then they're, like I said, they're kind of at the top of the food chain with them, and but that's why they get called space communists, is because of the greater good line. But really, they're just another totalitarian empire at the end of the day, because at the very top of the pole for the Tau are the Ethereals, which there's a whole thing with them. But continuing on this thread, so then you have the Necrons, which are, the way I like to say that they're the space robot, or they're Egyptian space robot zombies. Yeah, if you look at their aesthetic for like 2 seconds, you'll be like, yeah, that is very Egyptian inspired, and it looks great. I love it. And then you mentioned the orcs, and then you have the Eldar, or the Eldari. And they're divided into technically 3 factions, but you barely ever hear about them.
Yeah, Eldar, they're the space elves, right?
Yes, yeah, they're the space elves, and so you have the, and I will answer that in just a second, Tevi, I promise.
All right, I got the Necrons pulled up here.
Yeah,
they definitely space zombies, robot zombies.
Yeah. Well, and what's really crazy too is the stuff that they're built out of is they call it necrodermis, and it's referred to as like living metal, because it will like kind of mold itself back together, and it's hinted at kind of being a nanomachine thing, but not really. But Yeah, so then you have the Eldar, and they're divided technically into, well, if you include the Ynnari, there's 4, but the 3 ones that everybody talks about are the Craftworld Eldar, so those are the ones that are usually just referred to as Eldar, which is what you have pulled up here, I believe. Yeah, there's another one. And then you have the Drukhari, or the Dark Eldar, and they're like the Chaos Corrupted, well, not exactly corrupt.
They're dark elves. They're dark elves.
They're Dark Elves, exactly. And then you have the Exodites, and there's a long explanation as to why they're split up the way they are, which we can get into if you like a little bit later.
Yeah, we can get into later.
And then the ones I actually know the least about, and it's because they've kind of come back and I haven't taken the time to look into them, is the Leagues of Votan, who are technically human, but they're like the they were originally called squats forever ago, and then they just kind of fell out of canon. But their whole
out of canon.
Yeah, and then they brought them back. They're essentially space dwarves, but they were originally human. Dwarves. Yeah, and they were put on, they colonized planets that had like super high gravity, and so it height, and it's a whole thing. They're space dwarves.
Okay.
But that's kind of all of them in a very, very quick nutshell. And Tim, for
I think you very glaze over the orcs.
Oh yes, and of course, who can forget the orcs? Space fungus.
The thing with orcs that I always that kind of fascinated me is red makes it go faster, and then someone explained it to me how they're powered by belief, so they believe red makes it go faster, thus it happens. And it's even I think in one of the rule sets that if you paint an orc vehicle red, it actually does get to go faster. And I thought that was so cool and creative.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite aspects of that faction. Real quick, I want to answer Tevia's question. I'm probably butchering that pronunciation. I apologize.
Actually, it's right. You got it right.
Oh, I did. Oh, good. So rogue traders. What I like about rogue traders is that they're this weird exception to the imperial system. Like they're handed a piece of paper that says I can do whatever the hell I want. And they do, and that does include like trading with Xenos, which is a big no-no. Their whole screed is that they go out and they spread the word of the Emperor where the Emperor's light doesn't touch, or that kind of thing. And so I always kind of think that's a neat thing. And so that's part of the reason why they're in like the RPGs and stuff, because they have the freedom to kind of just do whatever. So you can build these different characters. You could even have Xenos characters in your party if you wanted to. If you've played the
real
game,
quick, Xenos, are those basically like the xenomorphs from Alien?
No, so that's any alien.
Okay.
In this lexicon anyway, it's any alien. So right. Eldar, orcs, all that good stuff. So rogue traders, just in general, they're like I said, they have a pass to do whatever they want. Just about the only ones who can actually rein them in is the Inquisition. So
no one expects the Inquisition.
Yeah. Quite literally sometimes.
The Inquisition. Sorry, I got jokes.
You're fine. Jokes are great. I love jokes. Let's see. Yeah, so I don't know. They're the easiest to roleplay because there's so much freedom to them.
Okay.
That's kind of why you'll see them. Not necessarily no consequence. Not
some consequence.
Yeah, so they have to. They're basically a law unto themselves for the most part. Again, the only ones who can really step in and do anything against them are Inquisitors. Now, the other thing about rogue traders is they're not just confined to their ships. Like they don't just live in one ship and all that sort of thing. They will actually build empires, like small pocket kingdoms of like several systems. So they can quite literally be more powerful than planetary governors, or at least on par with like sector commanders, because they can do whatever they want. They can lay claim to planets. They can colonize planets. Like, they don't need. They basically can just cut through all of that crazy red tape that the Imperium is plagued with. And if
I
anybody
remember
complains,
this one story where they're doing a game of Rogue Trader, and they had an orc in their party, and they went to like an Imperial world, and like this other Space Marine character saw the orc, and he's like, "Okay, get him out of my sight, or I'll kill him." And they didn't, and so he killed the orc, and the Rogue Trader got mad at the Space Marine character. It's like, "I'm a Space Marine. I kill orcs," and he says, "Go to your guild." Like, "Oh, I have this piece of paper." It's like, "Go to your guild hall and tell them it happened. They'll remove your license just for wasting their time."
right? So with the Rogue Trader RPG, you can have a player character that is the Rogue Trader, and then you can leave that up to the GM and then your members of his crew.
Mm-hmm.
So the only people who can revoke their warrant of trade, so that's the piece of paper that tells them what they can do, is the Inquisition. And even then there has to be kind of a thing, like a big governmental body, if I'm remembering correctly,
Mm-hmm.
that has to come together and decide that, okay, we need to pull the warrant of trade, because it's a hereditary thing. So some of these,
because like I have played. I think I played like 1 or 2 sessions of Rogue Trader. It was pretty fun. We had this. I remember we had this party. We were on this world. The GM had set like this giant encounter, like this big sandworm person, and so our navigator, he just like removed his hood, stared at the worm, and like rolled 100, and instantly killed him. The GM was so pissed.
well, and so one of my favorite aspects of the tabletop RPGs, and it's kind of a feature across all of them, not just like the 40K ones, but also the fantasy ones.
Yeah. Also, real quick, hey Patty.
Hey, Patty.
Sorry, I gotta pay the bills.
Nah, you're good. Yeah. So you know how like in I'm assuming you've played Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
So with D&D, you have your critical. You do 2 or 3 or whatever 4 times damage, right?
Mm-hmm.
So with these tabletops, not the army games, specifically the RPGs, when you roll critical damage, you roll damage again. And if you get a critical damage, you roll again. And you roll again. And you roll again until you stop. You don't get critical damage anymore. So I always think that's funny. That you could stack up criticals, and it's like, how much damage have you done? I don't know anymore. But it's great. I just love the extra little piece of chaos, and it's kind of reflected in their magic system, or in this case, their psychic powers. You could do this thing. You use your psychic power. You have to roll a check, and if you fail it, then you incur what's called perils of the warp. And that can entail anything from, your nose bleeds a little bit, to you explode and a demon is summoned. Now, granted, that's a pretty exploding dice. Yes.
Yeah, actually remember we were playing the game, and we weren't doing exploding dice, but one of the other people was like, "So we're not doing exploding dice," and the DM kind of confirmed we weren't doing, like. So I've actually heard that term before. So it's kind of funny.
Yeah, it's fantastic because it could just get so crazy so quickly.
How much damage have you done? Yes.
All of it.
Yes, all of it.
What
do you mean all of it? All of it!
Yeah. It's some of my. I love that they build in chaos into the rules too. Like, just random crazy crap can happen, and it's fantastic. It's one of the other kind of defining things in 40K's stuff is just super over the top. Like, scale is nuts.
Have you seen those pauldrons?
Right. The pauldrons kind of hint you at it a little bit.
Yeah. Here's an interesting lore question. Tevia asks, why aren't Psykers basically a gamble for the Imperium?
So really, originally, excuse me. So before the 40K setting, as we know, it starts to take shape. Oh God, it's happening already. There's the Horus Heresy, right? And it's after the end of the Horus Heresy is what establishes the 40k universe as it is now, essentially. There's a lot of stuff that happens. It's 10,000 years of time, so of course there's a lot of stuff. But the Horus Heresy is what sets the Imperium down the path that it's on now. Originally, psychic powers were shunned. Not necessarily openly, but the Emperor was like, okay, like, you can't use those. You can't experiment with that. That's not a thing that you're supposed to do anything with. Now, that being said, there was essentially a court case, to make it mild, or to put it in layman's terms, where the Emperor sat down with his psychic son, or Primarch. You probably have heard the term Primarch.
Mm-hmm.
Magnus the Red. And he sits down with him and a bunch of other witnesses, and it was called the Council of Nicaea, and that's when when he flat out bans psychers, psychic powers, all of it. And so at the time, even during the Great Crusade, so this is when the Imperium was going out and retaking human space, essentially. And so they were already using Psyker Space Marines, which are called librarians. And so
they are.
Yeah, and so what happened was that they ended up setting these guys. They basically told them they can't do it anymore, and if they practice it, then they get sanctioned by the Emperor, which usually means a bolt to the skull, courtesy of the Space Wolves. And so this pisses Magnus off, and there's a whole thing that goes on with that. So originally they were outlawed, to keep it short and sweet, even though I said a lot more already. We're going to pretend that that's fine. But what happens is that during the Horus Heresy, obviously the traitors don't care anymore. They don't care about the Council of Nicaea. None of that matters. Magnus is sided with them after some shenanigans. So they're putting psychers to fight for them, and they're also summoning daemons or demons, and all that sort of stuff. So basically it comes down to them realizing that the best way to fight a psyker is with another psyker.
Yeah, sounds about right.
Best way to fight a mage is with another mage, right? So it's kind of the same concept. So, but that doesn't mean that they're safe either. They are still very much a gamble, and they're you have to get sanctioned by the Imperium to, like, I guess, legally practice your stuff, your abilities. But the thing is that doesn't mean you're just walking around free either. You're either in an Inquisitor's retinue, or you're attached to the Imperial Guard as like you're basically civil, like, say you're a civilian, but they're not. They are part of the at least their force of arms. They are a weapon in the arsenal, but generally speaking, they are feared. Just even if they call them sanctioned psychers, even if that is the case, like, people around them are scared of them, because there's just this, being tainted by the warp is obviously a very bad thing. And it's down to, like, the lowest levels of the social strata. So, like, all the way down to the underhive. Like, this is a thing that is thoroughly ingrained in Imperial society, is that psychers are to be feared. The warp is to be feared. If you see any signs of the warp or corruption or mutation, purge the heretic, the mutant, and the xeno. Like, that's a big thing. But yeah, so any sort of psychic manifestation is reported immediately, and if the psyker isn't just outright killed, it's like a witch trial, burn the witch kind of deal. It's the same idea. If that doesn't happen, then they get picked up by the black ships. And so what these are is exactly what they sound like. They're psyker prison ships. And they will come to your planet, and they will take your psychers into these black ships, and they bring them back to Terra, Earth. And they evaluate them depending on their level of strength. And there are several different levels of psychic ratings. I can't name them all off the top of my head, but there's a lot of them. And so, but under a certain level, like beyond, like where you're not going to be super useful, they send you off to be sacrificed to the Golden Throne, where the Emperor sits. Because the Emperor requires 1,000 Psychers to be sacrificed to the Golden Throne every day in order to keep functioning. So that's
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, Warhammer is definitely a setting of extremes.
Yeah, well, and that's also part of the draw for it too. Like it's in your face, it's over the top, it's grim, it's dark, hence the grim dark label all the time. And yeah, it's just there's a lot of things I just absolutely adore about the setting. And Tavia, going back to your earlier question, who are the good guys? That's humanity, obviously. That's just the answer. No,
yes, of course.
The thing is like, yeah, like overall factions are not. There's none of them are good. Flat out, they're just not. The Imperium is a very totalitarian, corrupt in in a lot of areas, decrepit. You know, also all the negative things that you would that come with the Imperium. Those are all true. So the Imperium itself, if you look at it on a purely moral level, you don't necessarily factor in anything else going on in the universe. Yes, they're evil. They do evil things. It is what it is. However, in my opinion, and there's a lot of people online who will disagree with me, and that's fine. When you take the Imperium as it is and you set it against everything else in that universe, all the threats they have to face, not just the aliens, but you also have to actively worry about chaos and the warp, you know, things that can just spring up in the middle of the population.
So essentially it's, you think I'm bad, take a look at that other guy, he's worse.
Right, exactly. And the other thing is too is what makes them good too is these, aside from them being human and that sort of thing, and you know, the human spirit, the indomitability of the human spirit. There we go. You have characters that will do truly heroic things. And that's not to say that the other aliens are not capable of doing that, except for orcs and Tyranids. But you know, that's a whole other thing. I mean, but there's moments where you can look at him and say, wow, that isn't actually a good thing that they did. And that kind of makes me lean more towards them being the good guys, or they're not being evil. Is because
so the one thing like I keep hearing people talk about is like the lore. Like the lore is really important to 40K fans. Would you say that's correct?
Oh yes, yeah. So there's well, it also depends on who you talk to. For hi,
everyone
Justin.
panic! Justin's here. Oh, being silly. Continue.
Oh, you're fine. So yeah, so there's people like me who are very into the lore. We find it very important, and there is a fluidity to it. That is a thing that is baked into 40K lore, is that it's not always reliable, or because of the warp, things may shift and change. Like things like, just as a random example, if you travel through the warp, you could potentially arrive at your destination 50 years before you left, or 200 years after you left. Like it's crazy. Most of the time that doesn't happen, but it can. But the point of it is that there's a lot of flexibility in 40K.
I think it would be really interesting where some Imperial manships are traveling back to Terra, and they travel so far back they actually go to modern day Earth. That's like because of chaos. That like just imagine a Warhammer ship just appearing above our Earth right now. That actually is like, I'm sorry, I just came up with that idea. And if somebody steals it, that's fine. I'm not going to be writing this novel anytime soon. So please, if anyone wants to write that novel, maybe give me a special thanks. I don't know, but like that, like.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that. I wrote a fan fiction where our contemporary Earth actually gets pulled like pulled into the future and simultaneously exists with the 30K Earth as it takes place during the Great Crusade.
Okay.
And yeah, it's a whole thing. I don't know. Long story short, I found that interesting as well. I would think that'd be crazy. You look up and you see this battle barge in the sky, and it's, you know, a 15-kilometer long ship just armed to the teeth, and it's like,
welcome to Earth.
Yeah.
So I do have some questions. One thing I keep hearing, like, it's kind of like a big like point of contention among Warhammer fans, and you're gonna groan when I say this: female Space Marine.
Yep.
you knew where I was going. You knew where I was going.
I knew. Yeah. So, and this is actually going to tie into what I was saying about the lore earlier. Is that, you know, there's a lot of flexibility to the lore. It's built in. Everybody knows and acknowledges this. However, there are very specific things that are concrete to the setting. And what those things are is a point of contention. Now, most people, well, I shouldn't say most, maybe it's most, who knows, agree that Space Marines are all male. They should stay all male. They've always been all male. And there's several different reasons for that. Lore-wise, the reason for that is that there is it's called gene seed, and essentially what this is it's genetic material from that Space Marine's Primarch. So if you're an Ultramarine, you have Gilliman's, you know, gene seed, his seed, and
seed is strong,
right? And so this is what gives the Space Marines their traits, essentially. Like, this is also what helps turn them into Space Marines. This is their core foundational thing that they need to become a Space Marine. And it ties into like themes of, you know, fatherhood and you know, patriarchal connections, all that good stuff. And it's really emphasized. So if you ever see like a Space Marine talking to a Primarch, they always refer to him as father, and then the Primarch always refers to them as their son. And if they are talking with a Space Marine from like another chapter or legion, depending on the time of, you know, the time frame you're reading it about, it's nephew or it's cousin, you know, that sort of thing. And so it's this overall like familial brotherhood bond with the Space Marines, and I think that's very important to them as an army. But the gene seed is what makes, lore-wise, is what makes them Space Marines. And it's
like the keystone to the entire lore. Like, you remove that, it just basically unravels the entire thing.
Yes, for Space Marines specifically. But the one thing about gene seed is it says it only works in a male body. That has been a thing about gene seed since they were conceived, essentially, at least when they started fleshing that out. If you look at like the original 40K stuff, like Rogue Trader, it's vastly different in places than what is out there now. But yeah, so that is the point of contention, and there are some people out there who want to change that, who want to make it to where there's female Space Marines, even though they are and you could try and argue the orcs, but they're asexual. They're literally space fungus. Like, that's a thing. But
yeah, orcs have no gender.
Right. Exactly. But they're essentially, and at least up until the custodians change that they did.
Which, correctly, they changed that back pretty quickly.
It's just not talked about. They had the one story that they put out. They had the one social media post that kind of confirmed that, and then there hasn't been an outright thing that came out.
Yeah, I thought they were like changing the codex, and then they like changed it back. Because I swear I saw like a post where like they changed it back or something. I could be wrong.
I may have missed that. I'm not gonna lie. I had thought that they had kind of, because they'd put a story out in the codex, and they talked about the main character they talked about in that story was a female custodian. I don't know if they removed that. I don't think they did. But the big sign is that they haven't put out a single female custodian model at all.
Yeah, and I imagine that probably happened a lot in 40K. Like, they've done something that was controversial, and they never like outright removed it. They just stopped talking about it until we forgot about it. I'm sure this happened many times before.
Well, so there's a term for that, and it's called being squatted, because that was the first time they did that was with the squats. They just basically phased them out quietly. But yeah, so if you don't want to get squatted.
So it's happened so often. There's a term for it.
Yes, and Justin, to correct you there, it's not a chaplain; it's an apothecary that does that.
Okay.
'Cause
So
I
more than likely, female custodians got squatted. More than likely.
That's what it's looking like, because there was a lot of backlash to it in general. Now, and some people probably might not like me saying this, but I'm going to say it anyway.
Uh-oh.
So originally with bits and pieces of the custodian lore, they talk about how they're drawn from the sons of Terran nobility. Like that's just the thing that happens.
Mm-hmm.
That is a line in older codices. However, unlike Gene Seed, custodians are essentially, the way that it's described is they are tailor made by the Emperor himself, and this is done through like very specific and like artisan level genetic manipulation. Like it's like trying to think of a way to put this. Compare it to like a top end Ferrari, right? Like this thing has been designed. It's like from top to bottom to be the fastest and best it can be. You know, it's handmade. It's custom built. Everything is the top of the line, right? Those are custodians. Now, Space Marine is going to be a Mustang. Fantastic car. Still fast. Still muscular. However,
probably could beat some Ferraris.
Right. In some cases. Now, it kind of falls apart with custodians, but just the general concept is Space Marines are mass produced in comparison, and custodians are like handmade artisan pieces of work.
Like if Space Marines are a Z1 Corvette, a Custody is a Koenigsegg Agera.
Yes, exactly.
Like both very, very good cars. Like the ZR1 Corvette is a damn good car, but it's not a $2 million Koenigsegg Agera hand built by like 2 or 3 people.
Right. So yeah. So the point, circling back around to that. So the point with the female custodians is there's never been a specific line that says they can only be male.
There's a rub.
Right. Whereas with Gene Seed, it very specifically says it can only work on males. And really, the thing is with the female custodian thing, the biggest problem people had with it was that it was just dropped in out of nowhere with no explanation.
Yeah, and then it's like, and then they also try to say, oh, they've always been in the lore.
Yes.
They try to gaslight. They try to be aggressive about it.
Exactly.
And plus, you also have kind of like this cloud over the head where like they're doing the Amazon show, and there's kind of like from what I understood, seemed like there's kind of the suspicion that Amazon, and I actually heard reports that Amazon forced this change, and like if you notice, like because like obviously we're gonna have to talk about Henry Cavill here later, but just gonna mention this. No 40K stream would be complete without Henry Cavill, which I love that man dearly.
He's fantastic.
He can have my babies. I'm kidding.
Right.
Nice,
RJ.
I understood that reference. Also, hail RJ. You are the original sci-fi creator. sorry. But like it's Henry Cavill, and like the show was kind of quiet, but then it got whatever, and all of a sudden Henry's back. So I think there was some behind the scenes stuff. That's just my stuff. What's your opinion?
I probably would think that's the case, because what's really funny about Mr. Henry Cavill is his favorite army is the custodians. So when they dropped that change, I'm sure he was like, okay, what the hell, guys? And he does have a lot.
They wanted a female custody that could probably slap around Henry Cavill's character. They wanted that so bad.
Well, they gotta, somebody's gotta try and get back at him for The Witcher. That's a joke. I hate what they did to The Witcher. And
my god, I'm a huge Witcher fan. All right, like I have medallions. I literally have 2 or 3 medallions because I buy them off of Chinese websites and then like the chain breaks. But like, one sec, let me it's over here. Let me grab it for you. But like, I freaking love The Witcher, dude. And Henry was like so perfect. He was so perfect for that role, and like,
Oh, very nice.
yeah, like the only thing that's worse than The Witcher is Wheel of Time, and I'm a Wheel of Time fan. I've read all the books, and what they've done to that show.
I refuse to watch it. I
watched the first. I watched the first episode, and I only did that for content. Like I did like a Patreon exclusive episode where like I watched the episode and react to it. I almost had a heart attack. Like literally, there was some really freaking stupid that went down on there, and I literally almost had an aneurysm. Which, by the way, if you guys get me to 5 Patrons, I will do the first season. I may die in the process, but I've sacrificed some will to make. But let's catch up with some comments here.
Yes.
RJ says, I wish I could claim that. Debbie says, that's interesting. Who wanted that? More in the Witcher video games. 2 or 3. Yeah, I love Witcher 3. It's one of my favorite video games of all time. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, and I saw that. Yeah. You just saw a clip. I did the entire episode. That was just like the highlight. But before we get into Henry Cavill, which that could probably take up the rest of the stream, I wanted to touch upon something. So there's a certain movie that people say is a part of Warhammer lore, but isn't.
Oh, yep.
Okay, you know what? Take a guess what movie I'm talking about. Let's see if I'm on the right track.
It's Event Horizon, right?
Yeah. So.
What's
your opinion on the movie? Like, do you think it was like meant to be a Warhammer prequel or what?
I know. So the way that like the FTL travel works on that is very reminiscent of the warp, and it makes people crazy and all that good stuff. Is it actually? I really couldn't say. They
say it's humanity discovering the warp.
Right, and I love that as a theory. If somebody like officially came out and said that, I'd totally be on board.
Retroactively making a Warhammer film.
Yeah, he's just like, yeah, this is definitely like, Warhammer 28K or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, officially no, but theory-wise, I've always loved that because it really does. It does fit the criteria for the warp in a lot of different ways, and even actually with the body horror and stuff like that, and it really does like that is an accurate depiction of what happens with chaos corruption, like mentally and physically. So it's great. I love it. But no, not officially. I don't think it is.
Do you think they were inspired by Warhammer at least?
Oh, it wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me with how much.
Because sometimes you look at something as a fan and be like, okay, they definitely just watched this movie over and over again. They took that concept and ran with it, kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, it's the FTL travel there in Event Horizon. Definitely, it looks a lot like warp travel from 40K. So if somebody came and said that they pulled that from 40K, would not shock me in the slightest. Now, before because I've seen this question a couple of times, Tavia, or I've looked at it, and I want to answer it for you. So, as far as my favorite characters, I am almost exclusively 40K. I know very little about fantasy. No, in comparison, I know a bit. Just because I've always been sci-fi focused. Like when I was a kid, Star Wars was my jam. I liked Lord of the Rings, but if I had to pick between the two, it would have been Star Wars. I've just always been into sci-fi. So, as far as my favorite characters in 40K, I could give you a litany, but I'm going to keep it short. So
top five.
So first one's probably going to be Kane, Commissar Caiaphas Kane. Second up there is probably going to be Gaunt, who's also a Commissar. There's a theme here. And his whole, you can kind of lump in his regiment with them too. Gaunt's Ghosts. Fantastic series, by the way. Both of them are. I highly recommend them. Then from there, we have, I think it's pronounced Tiburos, the Red Wake. He's a massive space marine. He's the chapter master for the Carcharodon's Space Marine chapter, or the Space Sharks. And he's described as being, I think, two or three times larger than a regular Space Marine, to the point of where they had to custom fit his Terminator armor on him because he's so huge. Gazgul is on there too, and so Gazgul Mag Thraka is he's a big orc war boss, and kind of it. And then goes along with that is Commissar Sebastian Yurik. I love Commissars, by the way, if you haven't figured that out.
Okay.
But yeah, so those are my top 5 that I can rattle off there. Now, if one of the ones that I actually recently really liked that's come out, and this is through the Horus Heresy books and the Siege of Terra books specifically, was Kosaro Khan, and it's actually because of the Horus Heresy books that I figured out my favorite first founding chapter, one of the originals, and that's the White Scars. I absolutely adore the White Scars. And Kosaro Khan, why he stands out for me is he survives this battle. He's horribly wounded, survives this battle, and he's on Terra. And he basically has to traverse, miles of no man's land to get back to the Imperial Palace, right? So on his way to the Imperial Palace, he runs into a guardsman. Well, they're called something else at the time, but I'm just going to say guardsman for sake of ease. He runs into a guardsman who's carrying an infant in this war zone. And so this guardsman's trying to carry this infant back to the Imperial Palace. And so the Space Marine, Kosaro Khan, decides he's going to escort this guardsman with an infant back to the Imperial Palace, and along the way, this guardsman gets injured. He's dying, so he picks him up and clamps the wound on this guy who's carrying the baby, and he spends the rest and he just walks back to the Imperial Palace miles. And
one does not simply walk into the Imperial Palace.
Not during the Horus Heresy, no. But that's one of the more that when I was talking about like heroic moments, that's like one of my favorites that I like to point to, because it's like you have this essentially, to a normal human, a Space Marine is like just shy of a demigod. They're way stronger. They're way faster than humanity. They are normal humans. They are described. They are so fast that they have this effect called transhuman dread. And what that is that they are so large and move so quickly that the human mind can't deal with it, and it makes you insane from fear, because you're like, how the hell is this thing moving so fast? It shouldn't be able to move that fast. And so, you're talking about somebody that's been genetically crafted to be so far above humanity, it's crazy. And at least during the Horus Heresy and the Great Crusade, they treat baseline humans a bit better. And in 40K, though, that disparity is a lot more pronounced. They don't necessarily care as much about baseline humanity. Like they still do. It's their duty to protect the Imperium and through that, humanity as a whole. But still, even at the time, there's just this huge disparity between, standard human and Space Marine. And so when this demigod decides to stop and help this guy out, and nonetheless carry a baby back to the Imperial Palace at cost to himself, because he takes horrible injuries defending this guardsman and this baby in the process, like almost dying, and he manages to be successful, and he really didn't have to do that. There's no reason for him to stop and help these people out, but he did. And that's just like one of the easiest examples I can think of those heroic moments. And that's what really, really turned me on to the White Scars. The Salamanders are another, like whenever they are the stereotypical, like, love regular people faction or Space Marine chapter. So, but the White Scars are too, but they just aren't the one that people think of first. But okay. I love them. They're space
So-
Mongols.
So, like, what are like what are like the most generic Space Marine faction? Like, when everyone thinks of Space Marines, like the Boys in Blue, like, what is like the Space Marine faction?
Well, the one that you're going to see the most is the Ultramarines. They've been pushed to the forefront for many years. They are that's their Titus's chapter that he's a part of in the Space Marine games. So, but they're featured mainly, Tavia mentioned Titus. They're the ones that have been pushed into the limelight a lot. So that's why you'll see, if you ever see a Space Marine in blue with a white Omega symbol on their shoulder, those are the Ultramarines, and they're everywhere.
And what is it about the Ultramarines that like what stands them apart, and like what's interesting about them?
So they've been the poster child for 40K and Space Marines in general for a long time. But what I like about them is they are from one of the few surviving Primarchs, which is Gilliman in the 40 current timeline. But specifically, what makes them cool is Gilliman basically built an empire within an empire within an empire called the Realm of Ultramar. And so they are basically, they take all of the good ideals of the Imperium and they embody them. So the Realm of Ultramar is like very liberal for the most part in comparison to the rest of the Imperium. Like they're more focused on like building or like creating these works of architecture or art, or just in general like having a really well functioning society. And they are kind of like they're the paragons of this ideal of Gilliman and the Realm of Ultramar and all this other stuff. I always liked that old man. He's so cool and badass. Oh, is Marnius Calgar? Is probably who you're talking about, I guess.
Yeah, I'm just flipping through pictures on Google, so.
But yeah, they are kind of, and even within 40K, like characters will talk about the Ultramarines as kind of an ideal to be, depending on who. So if it's like a Space Wolf, they'll talk shit about him, which is great. They'll call them like basically party poopers because they're the Space Wolves and stuff like that, which is really kind of interesting. But they're basically all those top end, heroic traits that you see. They're supposed to embody that, and so I think that was probably by design on Games Workshop's Games Workshop side, but they had already kind of, in my opinion, they had already kind of built that up because of the Realm of Ultramar. When you compare them to all the other chapters, all the other legions or bloodlines, however you want to refer to them, they are the only ones that have that. No other Space Marine chapter has, or legion has, like an entire system, or let alone several systems. Like the Realm of Ultramar, I think, if I remember right, is made up of 500 worlds. So it's big.
Dang. So it's like an empire in and of itself.
Right, exactly. Except it's totally loyal to the Imperium. It's an empire within an empire, but it's a whole thing. But that's kind of why I think that they kind of inadvertently at first set them up to become that.
Wait! I gotta pause this. I gotta read this. Space Wolves are a faction composed entirely of Wolverine from the X-Men.
Yeah, kinda, yeah. Except with more of a Norse spin. They're very heavily Norse influenced. You can see it everywhere. It's great.
Okay.
But a lot of the reason why the Ultramarines are kind of pushed in the limelight and why people will talk smack about them is because of an author for them, Matt Ward, who really wanted the Ultramarines to be what they are now, from what I remember. And some of the things he wrote about them, and that's kind of also what like was the final push to make them the poster boys. But really, what I think it is it's just like like that kind of almost hipster attitude of where you don't want to like the most popular thing, right? But I don't know. I'm weird in the sense that I have a love for basically every chapter and every faction or species within the setting to some degree or another, just because I think they all have this really neat place within the setting, and they all have different little aspects that I like about them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we're talking about like poster child. Let's talk about probably the current biggest poster child. Well, he's not really a child. He's more of a handsome hunk of man meat. Henry Cavill, the person who has single-handedly proved nerds can be sexy, and a man who can make who can make building a PC into softcore pornography for some women. I'm not joking. Like, I don't know if you're aware of that. Like that Star Wars girl, she did a reaction to it. She was like hyperventilating. Like you could tell she was all like. Anna, do you need to pause the video and like whip out your magic wand?
do you need like half an hour to yourself to kind of work some things out there?
Work out some daddy issues here,
right? Rip Celestial Lions. Yeah.
Let's talk about Superman.
Yes, I mean you really can't blame him. Henry Cavill's a very good-looking man.
Very good-looking man.
But I like, aside from the obvious eye candy, depending on how you swing, I don't judge. No, the thing I really like about the guy, at least from what you see on the outside, because who knows how he is in person, is that he does seem to really love, to a nerd level, really love the settings that he gets into. Like with The Witcher, that was his biggest point of contention with the writers and the producers, is that they wanted to do their own thing, and he's like, well, no, that's not how this is supposed to go. It's this, and this.
To a point where it very visibly annoyed them so much that he left the show. And like the same thing happened to Bo DeMeo. I don't know if you're like familiar with that situation. But like, what's funny is you see some interviews. Like there's literally interviews where like I'm sure you've seen that clip with Felicia Day, where like he says, "Oh, I like my Warhammer." You see the women just go,
yeah.
I don't know if they're playing that up for the camera, but like when hit like I love that clip where him and like the Jaskier actor like, "Oh, you play Warhammer," and they like start making a friend date right there.
Yeah.
It is the most pure thing I've ever seen. I love it.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. Well, and then of course, when he really became a piece of nerd eye candy is when he was putting together his own computer in a tank top. You remember? I'm sure you've seen that.
I mean, did we not just do like a whole segment about like with Anna from that Star Wars?
Yeah.
Show,
Yeah. So
I mean, good for him. The dude knows his brand. I seriously, I respect it.
Yeah. Well, and so it's just like I was saying, the thing that really sells him for me is the fact that he seems really genuine with his love of things. And so when I heard about, and I'm sure a lot of people had the same feeling, when I heard about, he was going to be in on the Amazon show, like I was stoked. I was like, well, that means we have a guy on the inside who is really dedicated to the setting.
And he was an executive producer. Like, I think that was probably the linchpin for like the female custodian thing, because Amazon knows this Warhammer show does not happen without Henry. Like if he's not there, the show's gonna fall apart, because there's not enough of a drive. Like, they know if he's there, people will show up, but if he's not there, the project will literally fall apart.
Oh, 100%. Because that's the thing with the media nowadays, is that you can't trust stuff that's going to come out, because if it's a remake, or if it's like they take a fictional IP that hasn't been made into a show or a movie, track record the last decade or so has been it's completely strays away from the source material at some point, and it doesn't even look like what it was.
Yeah, like for example, I'm a fan of the video game Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. I love that game. It's great.
Oh, fantastic game.
It is a beautiful disaster of a game. And they're like, "Oh, we're gonna do a Bloodlines 2." It has literally nothing to do with Bloodlines. And Originally, it had some of the people from the original game, and they booted them out. And apparently, it's still coming out. It's like the same thing with the KOTOR remake.
Yeah.
Like I don't know if I watched this like hour-long video where this guy had like a bunch of inside information. Apparently, like they had the woman who said I was raped in GTA Online as the director of the game.
Yeah.
Sam Maggs. Like, by the way, she literally did say that. Like that was I can't.
Oh, I saw that. I was like, are you fucking serious?
A little bit of an aside, Sam Maggs is the perfect example of failing upwards. That woman has not created a damn thing worth doing. She keeps getting whatever. Her head game must be very strong.
Jesus.
I'm feeling spicy today.
You're fine. Failing upwards. Amazing.
It's a thing. It is a thing. And it's like, I think the only reason Henry is because if Henry was in literally any other era of Hollywood, he would be Tom Cruise levels famous because he's got the looks. No one debates that.
Oh yeah.
I'm sorry, he is a good actor. If you see him and stuff, he actually is a good actor.
Oh yeah.
At least as good of an actor as Tom Cruise.
Oh yeah.
So it's like. In literally any other actor era, he would have been like Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone levels of famous.
Yeah, 100%.
Literally any other era of Hollywood.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is too is like he has such bad luck with the stuff that he gets pulled into as well. Like the Man of Steel movie wasn't terrible. It wasn't great though, and then you get into the Snyderverse and all that good stuff, and
whatever. We're not going to go into that because that's a whole thing. Cobra Kai is good, but it got a bit long in the tooth towards the end. That's as much I'm going to say about that at the moment. I'm a huge Cobra Kai fan, but even I have issues with some of it. Honestly, feels like also the problem is a lot of the woke people got their teeth into vampire. I mean, that's really anything. We have. I was wondering when you'd show up, Caitlin. I knew I couldn't do a Warhammer stream without you showing up. So yeah, Werewolf or but yeah. So I think it's gonna be kind of interesting with this Warhammer show, which apparently it's still going on, but Warhammer, I feel like is a series that people are desperately trying to infiltrate, and the Warhammer people are just like standing at the gate saying no.
Yeah, well, that's I'm sure you've seen it flying around. There are legit different factions on at least Twitter of the different sides of the fandom within 40K, and a lot of the people that get derided are they call them chuds, or you have the gatekeeper. They call them gatekeepers.
I'm well aware of the term, so yeah.
Yeah. So chud hammer, and then you have woke hammer, and so that kind of tells you what all that is right now. But
for the record, I don't care if you paint your Space Marines like hot pink. Do it.
Yeah.
I don't really care. Like whatever. But trying to like dictate lore where it isn't, and it's just kind of forcing your way in. I'm sure you're familiar with the term tourist.
Oh yes, very familiar.
That's what I see happening.
Yeah, so that is a lot of the problem that I've seen is that you'll have these people that have a very surface level knowledge of the setting, and then they'll come in and start demanding things not for any good reason. It's for inclusion or diversity, blah 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 blah. And it's like, well, it's already built into the setting. You have like the Imperial Guard.
Guns.
Well, you have guns with guns, but even outside of that, the Imperial Guard is not unisex. The Imperial Navy is not unisex. Like, there's no barrier to entry based on gender for either of the two largest arms of the Imperial military.
I'm sure you could make an argument that they're like, if orcs are not gendered, like, okay, maybe there's some orcs that look female just because they're not gendered. Like, you could probably make that argument.
Yeah, you could try. They all take on like all the ones that they've ever depicted have all had like hyper masculine features.
Mhm.
They're big, beefy, green dudes, but in actuality, they are asexual. They reproduce through fungus. Like that's not a joke. That is the current running thing, and that's why you can never get rid of an orc infestation, because when you kill them, they release a bunch of spores, which then grow and
Oh,
come out of the ground.
Caitlin's like, no what? Please explain. She's a good person though. She's a good person.
Oh, it's fine.
Yeah. Let's see here. They've always kept the 2 founding chapters simply vague, so we can make their guys.
Yeah, so there's orcs are fungus. Yes, they are.
Okay.
So there's no orcs don't have a gender. They are a fungus.
Orcs are orcs. That's
yeah.
their gender. Their gender is orc.
Yeah.
No female orcs. Okay. Well, I'm gonna shut my mouth on that one.
Yeah. As far as when it comes to gender with the orcs, I just kind of laugh and shake my head. It's like, if you're even trying to ask about gender with orcs, then you don't know enough to be talking about it, in my opinion.
And you know what? Fair enough. I'm going to admit I don't know enough about.
I'm not saying you specifically. You're fine.
No, I'm admitting I'm wrong here. I'm admitting I'm wrong. I brought up an idea. I was shown how it was wrong, and I'm admitting I'm wrong. It's all good.
Yeah, that is true. So, about Blood Bowl.
It's obviously bad drag.
Some women want to see. Nice, RJ. Some women want to see themselves as 8-foot tall killing machines. If I don't see myself, it's bad fiction. Yeah, that's.
I mean, why do you think that Resident Evil character got like so popular instantaneously?
Yeah. Lady Demetrius.
I'm sorry. Like the best clip ever is like somebody got like a hold of a fly swatter in that game. And they like fly swatted her ass and like instantly turned around. Like,
oh God.
Well, I can speak to the Warcraft thing because like orcs are an actual race of people that breed like actual like things, so it makes sense there'd be a female and male orcs in Warcraft. But I can't speak for Warhammer, but I can speak for Warcraft.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's really kind of funny is, and again, this is speaking from a place of relative ignorance with Warhammer Fantasy, is the explanation for orcs in fantasy is not covered, as far as I remember. 40K is the only place where they actually explain how orcs reproduce.
Now, isn't the Warhammer Fantasy Earth actually in the 40K universe? I remember hearing something about that.
So, the official stance is no. It is a separate universe.
Okay.
However, there's a lot of coincidences that kind of line up that make you think that maybe it's like an alternate like pocket dimension to 40K, or it's sometime like far in the past or something like that, because when they talk about Sigmar, which is like the big human god in fantasy, they talk about how he came down from the sky in like a meteor or something like that, and so the prevailing fan theory is that he's one of the lost Primarchs.
Okay.
Now, is that the actual stance? No. They have come out and said that they are not the same universe. But when you look at all the different things, and especially when you talk about the warp and chaos, when you start talking about the orcs who look and act exactly like 40K orcs, the Eldar and all that, and all that good stuff, that's there's just too much to say that there's not some sort of connection there. Yes. Yeah, Tibia, that is the case. Officially, is 40K and fantasy are not connected.
I think the reason they do that is because they don't want the fantasy lore to be bound to the 40K lore. Like, for example, if they make the orcs like a biological species, that that way they can't have people say like, oh, look at the 40K lore. If they say it's a separate universe, then it's bound by different rules.
Yeah, exactly. I think That makes the most sense to me too.
Like me as a creator, I'd rather they be in a separate universe, so I'm not bound by, oh, this one codex from 40 years ago contradicts what I want to do.
Yeah, like Caitlin is saying, it isn't Earth, but there are a lot of crossover between the three settings. Yeah.
Okay.
So, but yeah, so I don't know. The orcs are great. In 40K, they're just all they want to do is fight. They just want to fight.
Wog.
Yes, they just want a good fight. And I always like to joke that they're the only like true neutral faction within 40K because they don't care. They just want to fight. Now, the real truth of the matter is that they're probably chaotic evil because they regularly practice slavery, because they can, and they have no qualms about killing everything. Man, woman, child, they don't care. They kill it, or they enslave it, or they eat it.
Well, I would make the argument maybe neutral evil.
Okay. Yeah, no, that makes more sense. Well, yeah. You could have.
And then Caitlin says, and you technically could have female orcs in Warhammer Fantasy because orcs are naturally occurring and have evolved.
And Tevye, yes, they do. They're the Eldar.
Yeah. And then, like Batman 89, Batman series, different worlds, but things are the same. Yeah, sounds about right.
Yeah, that's a pretty good equivalent. So yeah, but so because I have to gush about the orcs for a second because they're so much fun.
Go for
so it. You had touched on one of my favorite aspects about the orcs and their power of belief, and so what's really fun about that is that it's a latent, like, I call it a passive psychic effect between orcs.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just something that was built into them when they were created back during the War in Heaven. But I love that aspect of them, that the more they believe into a thing, the more it works. Like, so as like a small example of this. So when they build a weapon, so like a shooter. I can't do accents. I'm sorry, but a gun.
A shooter.
If it's used by somebody, if it's used by something other than an orcs, it might explode in your hand because it doesn't actually follow the laws of physics.
Like it's literally a potato, but they say it's a shooter, and so it shoots.
Right.
So you're just like, it's a freaking potato.
Right. Well, so a funny story about that is they talk about how like the gauges and controls in one of their vehicles are just painted on, and it works. Like it's stuff like that, and so they bend reality based on their beliefs, and it gets stronger the more of them there are. Is the other thing. So when you talk about an orc Wa, once they hit a certain point, they start building means of getting off the planet, and so a Wog is both an invasion and like a migratory process. This is how they spread across the galaxy, right?
Oh God!
And so what they'll start building ships. And what another interesting thing is about them is that you can take an orc that spawns on a planet, right? And more of them will spawn, and eventually one of them will spawn, and they're called they refer to them as brain boys, because everyone's a boy with the orcs, brain boys. But what's cool about it is the brain boys are spawned with essentially a piece of technology encoded in their genetics. So when they spawn, now you have an orc that knows how to make guns and ammo. And then as more of them show up, okay, this one now suddenly knows how to make vehicles. Okay, this one now knows how to mess with electricity, like that sort of thing. And it's because they were designed that way by the old ones. Which that's actually kind of where fantasy and 40K kind of mesh a little bit, is the concept of the old ones. Actually, the Slann are supposed to be, I can't remember I think they're descendants of the old one. They're the big psychic frogs. But they essentially they created the orcs and the Eldar to fight the Necrons. That's a whole thing. But yeah, so the more of them they gather, the more technologically advanced they get, and eventually they'll start building. They call them Gargants, and they are the orc equivalent to a Titan. And it's literally just a shit ton of scrap with guns attached to it, turned into a giant walker. And this only happens when there's enough of them fired up enough to fight. And so they'll build these massive war machines, and it's both a war machine and like an icon or totem to their two gods, which are Gork and Mork. Because of course Gork and Mork. And yeah. So yeah, they're really fun. Like,
Tevia does have a question for you.
Oh, sure.
He asked, question, speaking of the orcs in 40k universe, was there any orc in 40k that joined the Imperium, or are they just bad guys 24/7?
So the closest that you will find to any sort of quote-unquote friendly interaction between humans, they were created. For some reason, I thought they were descendant. Anyway, the closest you'll get is orc freebooters, or freebooters. They're basically orc space pirates, and they will occasionally trade with humans for different things, or you can, they will do a little bit of trade with humans, but
like probably like a rogue trader or something.
Yeah, or like a criminal element or whatever. And sometimes you can hire them as mercenaries to do stuff, but they're orcs, and eventually, if they get bored, they just do whatever they want anyway. So it's a very tenuous arrangement at best. But as far as anything official, no. There's never been any sort of official like loyal, like human loyal orc. They're always Xeno, they kill them. That's how it goes. And as far as Tavi, you also asked if Eldar are the good guys, quote unquote. I mean, the running line is that there are no good guys in 40k. I dispute that because I want humans to win because I'm human. But I guess they have the most sympathetic story in ways, because after the War in Heaven, I'm going to be very quick on this because if I'm not, it can spiral off. After the War in Heaven, the Eldar are ascendant. They basically take over the galaxy for a while. And then during that process, they have... That's also true. The Orcs do universally love Commissar Yurik. He's the only human that they respect. Anyway,
it's the best thing to fight.
It's true. It's true. But essentially what happens is the Eldar become so hedonistic, they birth a chaos god. And that's Slaanesh.
God.
Yeah, that's Slaanesh. And that's the fall of the Eldar. Is basically, like, think of the most depraved stuff that you can and multiply it by 10.
Oh, it reminds me of that quote from SAO where it's like, think of the worst possible thing you could ever imagine, and then multiply that by cancer.
Yes. Well, so I think the thing, like, people hear that and they kind of laugh, but like, think of it this way. So at the time, before the fall of the Eldar, they are immortal, right? They don't age, they don't die. But the other thing is even if their body dies, they're reincarnated with all their memories, with all their experiences. They're reborn, right? So imagine that, and you have just the most scientifically advanced technology on top of that, and psychic powers, and a galaxy-spanning empire. There's nobody that can compete with you. What else are you going to do besides a ton of drugs, crazy orgies, and all sorts of stuff? So
vanilla is not even a word in their vocabulary.
Yeah, well, some of the things that they touch on are like murder orgy rituals, like parties where, yeah, I'll just let you fill in the gap in your own mind there, but like stuff like that.
There is nothing that you can think of, like the most depraved thing you could possibly think of is considered vanilla by them. I'm just imagining.
Yes, yes, and it's not just like the
Like,
sexual sort of things.
that's basic stuff.
Right.
God, it's got so dark.
Yeah, well, and I mean, you have to think of it this way: like an entire species that's so hedonistic that they birth a god of excess from this, right?
I feel like that's a commentary on society.
Yeah, right. Um, but yeah, so they that was kind of their whole downfall was the birth of Slaanesh. That led to the fall of the Eldar, and that's where you'll actually get the division between the Eldar. That's what happens. So you have the Craft World Eldar, which are usually just referred to as Eldar. And the reason why they're called that is they live on these giant spaceships, like huge spaceships, like talking like New York City sized spaceships flying through, like, and they live on them. And so what they did is they kind of knew what was going to happen, and they fled the galaxy in these craft worlds until the fall of the Eldar had finished. Then you have the Dark Eldar, which live inside the webway, which is basically how the Eldar have their faster than light travel. They're are described as like tunnels through space, but they exist outside the warp. So it's like a totally safe, was a totally safe method of FTL travel.
Mm-hmm.
And it was built by the old ones, and it functions off of need. So like I need to go here, and it will then essentially kind of bend space and time to kind of take you to the nearest webway gate to let you out into where you want to go. And so the biggest appeal to that obviously is the fact that you don't have to travel through the warp to get where you want to go. So you're safe from demons and the chaoticness that comes from that. But anyway, so at the center of the webway is a city called Kamora. And that's where all the Dark Eldar were when the fall of the Eldar happened. And so
Okay, I can like it's Sodom and Gomorrah.
Pretty much. And so that's where they were when the fall of the Eldar occurred, and so they weren't immediately devoured by Slaanesh as it was being born. So, and yes, that's the other thing too. So, to stave off Slaanesh, they have to essentially continue to be depraved. So they'll do that through feeding off of fear and pain, and so that's why you'll see they'll talk about Dark Eldar like raiding fleets where they'll capture thousands of people to bring back to Kamora to then torture to death in ever crazy ways. And it's to basically keep themselves from being eaten by Slaanesh, having their souls eaten by Slaanesh, because that's the big thing with all Eldar is that Slaanesh wants to eat their souls. Yeah. And then you have the Exodites, which are similar to the Craft World Eldar, except they inhabited certain planets way on the outskirts of the galaxy and cut themselves off entirely from the rest of the Eldar Empire.
All right. And all right, we have our Reaper King here, Black Reaper Kai. How you doing, buddy?
Hey.
So another thing I wanted to touch upon is this thing is like, is the Emperor dying?
So technically, he's perpetually trapped in a state between life and death. So what happens is Horus Heresy, Invasion of Terra. During that time, the Emperor is sitting on the Golden Throne already before, like, as Horus is attacking Terra. He's already sitting on the Golden Throne, and that's because Magnus basically F's up Daddy's big project, which is to create a human entrance into the webway. And creates a breach in the webway that then allows demons to spawn into and come into the webway, and so they start trying to invade the Imperial Palace through this portal. And the only way to keep them out is the Emperor has to sit on the Golden Throne and hold that portal shut. And then when eventually Malkador sits on there, so then the Emperor can go and kick Horus's ass. But in that process, he essentially almost dies, like as close to death as the Emperor's ever been. So he gets put onto the Golden Throne because not only does it amplify his psychic powers, it also is like a very advanced life support system. So yes and no. He's basically dead, but not really, and that's why you'll hear one of the more infamous chaos insults is, you dare serve the corpse emperor, that kind of thing.
All right, so we got Herman saying yo,
Hey.
and then Justin Owen says the emperor is a corpse on life support. He naturally reincarnates. People don't realize that, so they have him on reincarnation.
So he's a perpetual, which is essentially it is a reincarnation of a sort. So when a perpetual is if you die, you just come back.
Mhm.
So he's been around since basically almost since the dawn of humanity.
Okay.
Except he's been like hiding in the shadows, like nudging events, that whole thing, until he decides to reveal himself because humanity's fucking up too much. But a perpetual is essentially an immortal that will infinitely be reincarnated. But they don't know that about him. So they force him to stay alive on the golden throne. And in order to do that, like I mentioned way before, they have to feed him 1,000 souls a day, or 1,000 psychers a day. The downside, though,
talk about a diet.
Yeah. Well, the downside to that is that he also powers the Astronomicon, which is essentially a giant psychic lighthouse in space, and it's how super brutal to stay in that throne. Yeah. So that's how they navigate the warp. And so if the Astronomicon goes off, now they have no way of actually navigating through the warp, so they can't get anywhere they want to get. So that's the kind of the flip side to that coin. So even if they let him die, they cripple their own empire in the process.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's kind of what Justin is saying too, is one of the biggest ironies about the Emperor is there's a really famous short story that's going out there, and I believe it's called The Last Church. And it's the Emperor goes to this church because he's been pushing, like, he wants to get rid of all religions. And there's an underlying reason to that, and it's tied into the warp. But he's going around and he's basically like forcefully or convincing these churches to all close. So this is the last church standing on Terra, right? So he goes to this church dressed as just like a peasant. And he sits down and he starts talking to this priest, basically going back and forth about religion and belief and this, that, and the other thing. And eventually he convinces this, like through conversation, convinces this priest to just end his religion. Like he's the last practicing
dude
priest.
Passed a speech check with flying colors.
Oh yeah. Emperor of the text-to-speech device is great.
See, the Emperor. See, what people don't realize is the Emperor's charisma is 50 out of 20.
It's true. But one of the other things it's kind of interesting too is the power of belief. So in the Siege of Terra books and throughout the Horus Heresy, he's atheistic. He doesn't want to be worshipped. Like that is a big thing. He actually, Lorgar, one of his quote unquote sons, Primarch, who turns traitor, wants to worship him. Thinks he's a god. Wants him to be worshipped. Like he even writes the Imperial Bible, essentially the Lectitio Divinitatis, which is still circulated in modern 40k, by the way. It is actually the foundation for the imperial cult, or like the main imperial religion, which nobody knows. Yeah, why Lorgar, one of the Primarchs, turned to chaos. Yes. So what happens is that he's preaching the Emperor's a god, on and on and on, and he's passing it on to the worlds that he basically conquers back for the Imperium. The Emperor finds out about it, is pissed, and the Emperor and the Ultramarines go to this planet called Monarchia, and it's considered like the crown jewel of Lorgar and the word bearers, they call them compliances, but they're basically conquests.
Mm-hmm.
Is like the crown jewel of this, and then I can't remember the name of the city, but essentially what he does is he comes down, shoves all of the civilians out of the city, and then flattens it, like obliterates this city. And then after that comes down with the Ultramarines as escort, and he basically rips Lorgar a new asshole in front of his entire legion and the Ultramarines.
Wow.
Like, this is like, he censors the shit out of him. And from that point on, he's disillusioned, and then he talks to Erebus and Corferon and all this other shit. But like, that is how seriously the Emperor doesn't want to be worshipped. And it's because the way the warp functions is it's based off of emotion and belief. So the more you believe in something, the more powerful it becomes. And so that's
the orcs must be able to use the warp pretty well, I imagine.
So they function off of a subsection of the warp. Like it's Wa energy is what they call it, or Wa, right?
The Wa.
Yeah, and so.
Oh god! I can't. I please forget. I just said that.
Destroy Sirius Grotto. Yeah, kinda. Yeah, that's kind of what it is, except with vaporizing a city, and like being forced to breathe in the ashes of it, kind of thing. Well, and what's kind of one of my favorite, like, whoa, that's cool moments is, so you have the entire Wordbearers Legion, which is Lorgar's sons, all his Marines, right? And they are the second largest legion at the time. So we're talking like over, I think it's like 1 million Space Marines, right? Mm-hmm. They're all on this parade ground facing towards the Emperor, who's backed by Guilliman and the Ultramarines. And they're all standing there, right? And Lorgar's like, no, father, blah, 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 blah. And the Emperor just goes, silence, kneel. And 1 million Space Marines kneel simultaneously.
Kneel before Zod.
Yeah, but and Lorgar too, for that matter. And it's described as like his presence is just so powerful. Without even thinking, they just kneel.
Wait, are you saying Henry Cavill is the Emperor?
He might very well be.
Henry Cavill's the God Emperor, man confirmed.
So.
All right. Yeah, we got a question by Tevya. He says, speaking of the Warhammer 40k universe, that reminds me, why do some humans in this universe go to chaos? Because chaos in of itself sounds like a bad thing, especially getting possessed by a demon. I mean, well, you can say that about lots of things, but go ahead.
There's a variety of reasons. Power is usually the most common one, because chaos, in a way, offers an easy path to power.
The way to chaos is easy. The way of the light is harder.
Right. Essentially, yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
No, you're fine, man. No, it's the other thing. That's kind of the other downside to the Imperium too, is that because they're so oppressive, they create, civil unrest, and when you oppress somebody long enough, when they feel powerless for long enough, they're going to start looking at anything to feel power again. And that's the appeal of chaos. It's like, oh, just worship us, just give in, and you will have all the power that you wanted.
Yeah, the way that I liken it, and this is with anything in life, you can only wind a clock so tightly before it snaps.
Exactly. So, and especially, and there's different different chaos gods. So there's four main ones.
Nurgle. Is there a chaos god with like big old titties? Because I want to join them.
That would be Slaanesh.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I need to look this up.
Well, I mean, Slaanesh, I guess it would just be better to say one of its names is the Prince of Pleasure. The god of excess. But there's four. The four main chaos gods. There's Slaanesh, which I've mentioned. There's Khorne, Nurgle, and Tzeentch.
I worship thee, O Slaanesh. Please take me into your tiggle bitty.
if you want your penis flayed, that's a good way to get your penis flayed. Just saying.
I mean, there are worse ways to die.
Are there? I don't know.
Oh.
Yeah, so Slaanesh is the god of excess. That's the one that gets memed a lot for being like the sexy god and all that kind of thing. And they're like, oh, it's just about being horny. Yeah, it's about being horny enough to where like you take pleasure in flaying your genitals. Like, I'm not joking. Um,
Oh
but-
God, Hellraiser and her would. Oh my God, he put those two together. The purple. See, oh yeah, the gas god is crazy. Tenacious pleasure encourages. Yeah.
yes.
So we're talking about horny jail. We're talking about the realm of Ganesh. It's literally horny jail.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's where all the horny go.
And getting bonked is like the least of your concerns.
Yeah. So you have. So I'll touch on the chaos gods real quick. So Slaanesh we've already covered. So then you have Khorne, which is all about like fighting and rage and anger. Like they
want you to follow the leader for their Tristan transistor. And all day long, they think about Adidas. Sorry. I am the purveyor. If I was a chaos god, it would be the chaos god of very bad jokes.
You know what? That's okay. That's fine. But they all basically embody like human failings and vices, right? So Khorne is all anger and bloodshed and fighting. You have Tzeentch, which is knowledge and plots and trickery, and then you have Nurgle, which is disease, death, and rebirth, and all this other stuff. So
I did look up a picture of the chaos god Khorne, and this is what he looks like. For those who don't know, that's Jonathan Davis, lead singer of the band Khorne. I'm sorry, I'm just having way too much fun.
Fun is good.
Yes.
Fun is good.
Continue though, sir.
No, but yeah, so they all just kind of embody like different human failings. But the other thing too is like Khorne also is the embodiment of pride, and pride is not always necessarily a bad thing. Desire for knowledge is not necessarily a bad thing. That's Tzeentch, but it's when it's taken to the nth degree is when it starts to touch on these gods, and that's kind of what they embody. Is just these things amped up to like a god of these things. So of course it's going to be way over the top. Yeah, like Justin is saying, they also embody positive traits, but negative energy is easier to get. Especially in this particular universe, it's almost kind of funny that the Chaos Gods are self-perpetuating because it's a universe of constant warfare, and these different, huge pressures on species, and like all these different things that kind of self-perpetuate the universe, and it's great.
Yeah, I've heard similar things, like gods being based off of kind of fueled by belief. It's a pretty interesting concept. So one thing I would ask you is, I think all this is fascinating, and I think a lot of the people viewing this is fascinating. If someone wanted to get started in Warhammer 40k, whether it be the lore, the minis, or just in general, what would you say is a good way to like get started in this universe?
So, as far as like a lore standpoint, if you want to start off on something that's not like super grimdark right out of the gate, the Comics Arcane books are fantastic for that, because it does give you a good look at the 40k universe. It does touch on the darker themes of it, but there's a little bit of comedy to kind of soften that a little bit. It gives you a nice little easy introduction into it, and it's a very standalone thing. And the way they're written is, so you have Kane's narrative that he has, and it's basically like a journal of sorts, like an audio journal, but his not official girlfriend is an inquisitor named Amberly Vale, and she is putting this biography together. She calls it the Kane Archive. So she will actually have little notes interjected into it that will explain a concept that most people wouldn't be familiar with if they're not well versed in the 40k. Like she'll, like an example, she'll break down how, like how warp travel works, like in very very like simple ways, like from a very like peasant view of it. You know, as like a standard traveler, like you're not going to know the ins and outs of like warp travel, but you'll know the very general, like you know a plane flies, you know roughly how a plane flies, but you don't know the engineering that makes the plane fly, kind of deal. And so she does that a lot, where she'll have little notes on like different little conceptual things within 40k, and so that's very nice for that too. Now, if you're wanting to get into something that's more dark and is written by the best Black Library author, in my opinion, Dan Abnett,
okay, real quick. What is the Black Library?
So that's the book publishing arm of Games Workshop.
Okay, cool.
It
So you can't
also
just throw terms out there, not expect you to understand. So.
no, you're good. You're good. It also does exist within the 40k universe as its own thing. It's a repository of knowledge that's like very secret. Nobody knows about it. It's guarded by the
I mean, they
Harlequin.
call it the Black Library for a reason. I'm sure if they called it the Purple Library, it might be a little more open.
Right.
Sorry, bad jokes. Remember, bad jokes.
You're fine. But if you're wanting to get into like well-written stuff that will kind of give you the darker side of it, Gaunt's Ghosts is a fantastic series to go for. Now, if you're somebody who wants to start from the quote-unquote beginning, you want to read the first book of the Horus Heresy, and that's Horus Rising, and then kind of go from there, which is a fantastic read in and of itself, and it's one that I recommend. But yeah, if you're wanting to if you want to be like the lore start, that's where you start.
Right.
Now, that being all said, yeah, the big library of the Eldar. That all being said, the way I started really getting into the lore is I'd open up the fandom and I would just start picking stuff that interested me and reading on it. And it's great because it doesn't cost a dime. You just pull it up and you start reading. And for the most part, the information is accurate. And there are citations and all that sort of thing. It's when you start getting into like the really finer details is when things get kind of muddy. But the overall like big bullet points, those are all accurate. So I always like that as a recommendation because, you know, if you're like me when I was starting out, I just didn't have the money to buy books or miniatures or any of that. But I had the fandom. Yeah, well, I had the wiki, right? Now, as far as miniatures, that's a little kind of up to you, really.
Yeah, because I've looked at like maybe getting some like orc figurines kind of start. Like I was looking at like a Strike Force, kind of thing, just to get started. Like basically for me, basically I just want enough just so I can do games. You know, like start like just a bare minimum. Like how many like I think it's like points. Like what's a bare minimum of points army you need just so you can start doing games at like game shops or whatever.
So that's actually where my experience is the least. I'm not big into the army side of things. I like the miniatures, I like building them, I like painting them. As far as playing the game, that's not really where I go. However, they do have different size games. So you have Kill Team, which is like squad level. So like 10 to 15 miniatures, and they build specific boxes for that, and that's like a self-contained box. Then you have like the actual army game, which I believe is on 10th edition at the moment.
Justin's like, buy a box of boys, Nick.
Yeah, there you go. And then with that, I believe it's the number of points is decided like before you start playing. So it's like I have 1,000-point army, you have 1,000-point army. You know, let's go at it. Here's an objective kind of thing.
Yeah, that's like I remember hanging around some game shops. We had like 1,000, 1,100, 15-point armies. I don't really see many people with 2,000-point armies. I mean, I don't. Those people are probably like very rich.
Yeah, yeah. I've seen some pretty insane collections, and like, how can you afford a house?
Yeah, their army is probably like I spent more in my my army than my car.
Yeah, tens of thousands of dollars.
Like
Well,
I can just imagine like some of these RVs costing more than some people's cars. If it's more than your house, I'm like, did you co-found Google or something?
Tevi, my favorite actually 40K game currently is Rogue Trader. I like the Rogue Trader game a lot because it gives you. I mean, first of all,
We're talking video games, right?
yeah. Video game wise, I love Rogue
I
Trader.
know Space Marine 2 was blowing up.
Space Marine 2 is
year.
great. Space Marine 2 is fantastic.
Isn't there like a Henry Cavill mod for that where like it replaces one of the people's takes with Henry Cavill?
Oh, I'm sure there is.
I did that with The Witcher, by the way. I actually replaced Geralt's face with Henry Cavill. I did a whole like live stream series about it. It was great.
Beautiful. I should do that. Yeah, but Rogue Trader for sure. I like Rogue Trader a lot. Space Marine.
I've done some role playing of. I've done some tabletop of Rogue Trader. I think I did Only War. Like we did a one shot like on a jungle planet. It was really bad. There was like this female NPC on the team. It was like a player run, a GM run player character, whatever you call it, and everyone was just trying to hit on this girl. like we were doing the thing. We just tried to like get with her, and eventually I think someone rolled well. And she's like, "All right, fine, but let's get back and have a shower first." Or whatever. The DM was just not having it. Orcs are expensive because you need so many boys.
Yes, so many boys.
Also a luck-based faction. Yeah. So for me, I was thinking either orcs or Tau because like I like the idea of Tau because 40K Gundam.
Yeah, well that's one of the reasons I like the Tau. They are also, I believe, they have some of the longest ranges, weapons wise.
Yeah, for me it's like the anime faction.
Yeah. But to finish up the video game question, so if I have to pick one game that I like the most out of all the 40K games that have come out, video games, is the first Dawn of War game. It's an RTS, very similar in flavor to StarCraft, but it is its own thing. It is a fantastic game. I highly recommend it. Make sure to buy, if you do get the Master Edition, so you get all the DLC, because each DLC adds a faction, and the last one that they added was Soulstorm, and that has the Sisters of Battle and the Dark Eldar in it. So if you want all the factions in 40K and you want an RTS, Dawn of War is the best one to go for.
Okay. 40K Gundam, sign me up. God dang it. Tau are 40K Star Trek Federation. They're the only group that welcomes other aliens.
Yes, that is true. Including humans.
Interesting. All right, so Warhammer. I really appreciate you coming on here. But where can people find you, and what do you got going on?
You can finally main me on Twitter. My @ is Mr. Antihero 1. And currently what I've been doing, I do write a little bit of fan fiction, which I have up on my DeviantArt. I also do stream with me and 3 of my boys on YouTube and Twitch.
Your boys.
Under Mournival Gaming. And we do a group stream every Wednesday, and then of the week about 8:30 at night, because we have jobs and kids, so we have to do it late. And then throughout the week, we pepper in solo streams. Usually, yes, I can never pronounce Tau stuff, but that's the Tau name for humans. Okay. Loyal humans to the Tau Empire. For a while, I was doing lore streams every Monday. It kind of fell off because I've had some stuff going on, but I am trying to get back into that. But yep. You can. Those are my 2 main things right now: is YouTube and Twitch, and then I have been trying to write more, but we'll see how that goes.
All right. As for myself, tomorrow you can join me. I'll be starting my playthrough of Cyberpunk 2077. That's gonna be really sweet. I am happy to announce the second draft of my first novel, Lost Kingdom, is finished. It is being edited. Right now, we'll be entering beta reading phase here very shortly. And Screecher 3 is all done. So that's really cool. And yeah, we're still hard at work on Quartermain, and then Screecher 4 is coming out later this year. So Saturday, we're doing Cyberpunk 2077. Sunday, we'll be doing our favorite superhero games. Jared from Comics League will be there. And on Monday, I'm very happy to announce we'll be doing, for Comics Watch, we'll be doing a stream about Punisher, his relation to like cops and like the symbols, with guest star Punisher scribe Mike Barron. That was like the big thing I was holding. I'm sorry, I'm a very, very busy man. So thank you, everybody. Before we leave, I'd like to give some member shout outs because you got to pay the bills. So for $5, you can be a torchbearer on this channel, which gives you access to custom emojis. You get shouted out with every stream, and eventually we're doing a Patreon stream. So a member stream. So our members are okay, just gotta keep clicking through this stuff. Is Jared from Comics League, JD, and Jason and Graham. So I really appreciate you guys, and thank everyone for joining us. Next week we'll be doing our Friday night feature, which will be Batman Forever. It's gonna be really, really freaking sweet. So thank everyone for joining us.
Man,
Remember,
it's a classic.
oh, it is. All right, everybody. Cheers.